Hi, this is Sarah Root, and this is my Special Education for Building Administrators case study for EDL 853. So this case study is when a student's rights are wronged. And this case comes from Nottingham High School, which is the central hub of activity in the city of Dover. It's a large high school that serves 3,200 students, and it was built in 1950, and so over time, a lot of the school has been reconstructed to meet state and federal guidelines for students and people with disabilities, and they've also had to add portables and different things to make room for their growing community and their growing school. And 1/4 of the building is still not up to code, and they are struggling with funds to do that. Dr. Harvey is the superintendent of the Dover Unified School District, and he's well-liked, well-loved. The school itself, or the schools there's 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and the 1 high school, Nottingham High School. And the community is incredibly supportive of the high school. In particular, the football program is top-notch. In fact, it's considered to be one of the top schools in that area for sure, as being an outstanding school for the football program and their academics. And the community really supports that, and they come out on Friday nights to watch those football games. It's a big deal. So knowing the background, after doing some research, the Hernandez family moved to Dover a few years ago because they wanted their 4 sons to attend Nottingham High School and this well-known football program. So Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez have 4 sons. So one of the sons is Miguel, and Miguel is an excellent football player. In fact, he's named quarterback as a sophomore, which has never been done in the history of Nottingham High School, which is a big deal because it's known for its football. And during a game, a semifinal game, it was a very important game, in the 4th quarter, they were going for a touchdown, and as the ball left Miguel's hand, he is tackled by a defensive lineman and is critically injured. He's rushed from the field and taken by paramedics, by ambulance to the hospital, and it is found that he has a spinal injury that has left him paralyzed from the waist down. And because of that, he is unable to walk and does spend a considerable amount of time following in rehab. So obviously, through that rehabilitation, Miguel, his family, and doctors are eager for him to return to school as soon as he's able. So when it looks like that time has come, the Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez meets with the high school counselor, Ms. Guzman, and in this conference, they tell her that they want Miguel to return to school as soon as possible. That is the hope. And so, and she says that of course he can do that as soon as she has the doctor's release, the doctor's note. And during that meeting, they also mentioned that Miguel is now in a wheelchair and needs access to classrooms. But other than that, he doesn't need anything else, any other accommodations. He's been doing just fine in school. He's eager to return. So 2 weeks pass, and they have the schools receive the doctor's note, and Miguel's returning to school, which is a very exciting time. And so much so that the morning of his return, there's a big assembly. People are excited. Myself as the principal, I give Miguel a trophy, just recognizing his commitment to the school and football and all that he has been through and what we appreciate about him, and that he's back. So after the assembly, he goes to his first period class, but when he gets there, Miss Guzman calls him out of class and tells him to come to the office. So he goes down to the office, and at that time, she tells him that she's changed his schedule for his 3rd block class. And instead of being in biology, because the biology class is not accessible by wheelchair, they've moved him to a different science class. But it's not biology, and it covers the graduation requirement, but it's not a college preparatory class. So it's not, it doesn't meet the requirements of a university. Obviously he went through the rest of his day, and that's when myself, the next morning, I'm contacted by Mrs. Hernandez. Actually, she contacts my secretary, and my secretary tells me that she's very upset. So, of course, I schedule an appointment to meet with her. And she informs me that she's very upset that Miguel has been denied access to his biology class. And she wants him back in his biology class. He needs it because he plans to go to college, and the university he wants to go to requires that he has biology. So towards the end of the meeting, or what I would assume to be the end of the meeting, Mr. Hernandez does join us, but he also brings with him an attorney. His name is Howard Carey, and he introduces himself as Miguel Hernandez's attorney. And Howard points out to me that, asks me if I'm familiar with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and that I'm denying access to a classroom at the school, and that he has a right to FAPE, a free and appropriate education. And so that Miguel's rights should be protected. So that's where we find ourselves at this point in time. So there are some legal issues obviously going on here. So just to review, the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is where students who qualify under the 13 disabilities will have an IEP and specially designed instruction to receive special education. He has not been evaluated for, or even a request for evaluation has not been submitted. So at this point in time, it doesn't mean that he'll never qualify for IDEA, but at this point in time, he doesn't, just because that process hasn't been followed. The same is true for the Section 504 Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That process is not that he wouldn't qualify, but the evaluation, or at least it hasn't said that the evaluation has been conducted or pursued. It sounds like they just want access to classrooms, but there wasn't anything about him being on a Section 504 plan or going through with the evaluation for that. However, ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a civil rights act. That means that it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And this goes in particular with Title II public entities, which is all public high schools, or all public schools, sorry. Elementary, secondary, any of them. So those are public entities, and you don't have to qualify for that. Him being in a wheelchair qualifies him. So they have to be accessible, right? So they must provide program access in an integrated setting unless separate programming is necessary to ensure equal benefits. And so that includes maybe relocating classes or making structural changes as necessary to upgrade a school, right? Something like this where it's really old. Also, the school must have a copy of their ADA self-evaluation transition plans, so that can be requested. So the fact that they don't have all of their building up to code, that would be part of a plan in the future to update it, and that is required by the district to have that. That's required. That's a federal law. That's required for them to have. So that is something that the lawyer could have requested to see. However, at this point in time, Miguel did not have a Section 504 plan or IDA, but he did qualify just by being in a wheelchair for the ADA access. There are some ethical issues here, absolutely. In particular with Ms. Guzman, the counselor, the parents were not consulted about this change, and I think a lot of this has to do with that timeliness. So they had 2 weeks, right? So she met with them, and then 2 weeks later he's starting to attend, he comes to attend school. There was plenty of time in there to realize that the biology class was not going to work. And it seems almost like a bait and switch to have him show up and then tell the student, we've changed your schedule. I mean, this is a kid coming back for the first day, and it's I think it's unethical even to remove him from class to tell him that. You know, like, this is a kid who has been through a lot and finally makes it to class, and he's in his wheelchair, and thinking about him then having to go down to the office. And I just think that there's a lot of ethical issues there. And the most important, obviously, being too that equity and access to educational resources, right? That they all students deserve access to educational resources regardless of who they are, disability, whatever it is. That is the biggest ethical issue here. That he deserves to have just as much access as anybody else. So synthesis, so putting this all together, this is what's going on. The school changed the schedule of a student with a physical disability because the classroom was not wheelchair accessible, but the new class does not ensure equitable access to academics. So here's the facts of the case. So the people, we've got Dr. Harvey, the superintendent, the principal, myself. There's a Hernandez family. They have 4 sons, one of them being Miguel, and the parents are Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez. Ms. Guzman is the counselor. Howard Carey is the attorney for Miguel. There's also students, teachers, coaches, doctors and medics, and the wonderful community members of Dover. Place. So the place is the city of Dover. It's the Dover Unified School District. There are 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 high school. The high school being Nottingham High School, which was built in the 1950s. But 1/4 of it is still not up to code, or it hasn't been reconstructed since then. There are 3,200 students that attend the school, and it's kind of bursting at the seams. It's got a lot of students and not as much space because it's an old school. So they've had to make do with what they have access to and what their funds would allow. And the other thing about this place is that Friday night football is a community event. People come out regardless if they have a kid on the team or whatever. It's just a Friday night activity that they love to do. Some of the unknowns is we don't really know the demographics, and we don't really know where, if it's rural, suburban, urban. We can make a few guesses on that, but it doesn't actually come out and say where it's at. The program, we know it's in a public school district. We know it's at a high school. We know that there's general education there. In particular, that there's a college preparatory classes, meaning that it's accredited. I mean, if it's a public school, it should be. Because we know FAPE has to be provided, a free and appropriate education has to be provided within the public school district. Even though they don't mention special education, we can assume that special education is also available at this school. And the other piece about program is we do know that they do have the biology class, the class he needs, the college prep class he needs, but they also have the science classes that meet graduation requirements but are not college prep. And so those options, so there's clearly some options for different classes within the school. So some review and prioritizing. So the class change is damaging to Miguel's ability to access a university in the future. We do know that for sure. 1/4 of the school is not wheelchair accessible. And we know that there is inequality and bias in the allocation of educational resources and opportunities, right? That the fact that he doesn't have access to what he needs to be successful means that they have not allocated their educational resources appropriately. So this is what we need. This is what he needs and what we need. We need to provide equitable access for Miguel. Develop a supportive and inclusive school culture, because clearly there is a breakdown there, at least with the adults. And we need to collectively work to meet the needs of students. It's all about collaboration and working together so that our students are successful, every single one. So here's some options. So the first option is to take no action. With that, the consequence of the lawsuit is inevitable, right? That's going to happen. There's a lawyer already present. The option 2 is to make the classroom accessible through construction. However, from what we understand, the funds are not available at this point in time, or haven't been available. The third option is to move the class to an accessible location. The consequence being everyone has to move. However, then he gets access. Option number 4, provide online access to the class. This is especially true after we've experienced COVID and the pandemic. We now know that we can provide online access to the classes, even WebEx or Zoom that student into the class. However, there's no real access to peers. And because of that, it kind of, there's a question about if it's equitable. So we're going to evaluate our options. So option number 1, which was take no action. So the pros are the counselor is supported and no changes. It's not a lot of work per se. It's because you're not doing anything. Cons are the lawsuit's inevitable. You're going to end up in a lawsuit. There's no collaboration, no willingness to work together, and the family's going to be angry. And I would add probably also the community as well. This community, I would assume based on their interest and love of the game of football, probably a lot of them have walked with the family through this situation. Option 2 is to make the classroom accessible. The pros being that it avoids any conflict. Miguel gets to stay in the class. Cons being that it's going to take some time, and so what to do in the meantime. We'd have to problem solve, and then also the cost. It would be costly, and it seems that there's a funding issue. Option 3 is to move the class to another location within the building that is accessible. The pros being it provides access and it avoids a lawsuit. Cons are the whole class has to move. It doesn't solve the long-term issue. The long-term issue being that 1/4 of the building is inaccessible, and that is not, and that's not a good thing. Option 4, the online access to the biology class. The pros is the student can be in the class, although not physically present, but present, especially nowadays with our technology with Zoom and WebEx. They avoid any building issues. They don't have to worry about that. And he maintains access to a college prep class. The cons being no real access to peers, no interaction, except with the computer screen. And I mean, we're seeing where that leads to. And it's not really equitable. If he's a student just like the rest of them, and he deserves access to the classroom just like every other student. So the best option, after looking through it all, is to do option 3, move the class, with a little bit of some other options, like a few other pieces added in here. But reason 1 being it doesn't cost anything to move the class. Reason 2, it gives time to build ADA accessibility options to that previous location. Reason 3, it avoids a lawsuit or continued conflict. It should resolve because he has what he needs for educational access. And reason number 4, it preserves community support. We could see this taking a turn where the community loses some support of the school, and that would not be good. We need the stakeholders' support as a community. So here's my action plan and how I plan to implement this plan of action. So number 1 and number 2 are actually probably at the exact same time, but first obviously change Miguel's schedule back, make sure he's in that biology class as soon as possible, and also move the class. So move the class to an accessible location. And I do know that the students may and teachers may be inconvenienced by that change, but I do think it becomes a teachable moment about being equitable and creating a culture of care in our building. Number 3 is meet with counselors. That's what I would do next, especially with Ms. Guzman. We have to review expectations for timely communication with families. With schedule changes and different things, that communication needs to be clear and done in a way that it shouldn't be a surprise like that. And also review laws and regulations. Clearly, Ms. Guzman did not understand ADA laws and providing educational access for students with disabilities. Number 4, review of 504 options. So I think also because the lawyer brought it up, we do need to talk about if a 504 evaluation is needed, and then follow through with the plan if it is determined that he does qualify for a 504 plan. Number 5 is evaluate accessibility needs. So we need to look at the school and determine what needs to be done to make the school ADA compliant and accessible for students with disabilities. That would hopefully be in that plan that I mentioned earlier for the required plan, but I think it's time to look at the plan again. And then 6, fund the building projects. We've got to consider building options, whether that's a bond or something else. We've got to figure out how to update the school so that this doesn't continue to be an issue, not only for Miguel, but for any other student, staff, parent, anyone else who comes to the building and needs access. Here's just some warnings that kind of go with that. So first, there's going to need to be some crucial conversations, and it's really important in crucial conversations to be tactful. There seems to be some harm done, and so I do think that some restorative conversations need to be had, in particular with the Hernandez family, and especially between Ms. Guzman and Miguel and the Hernandez family. And I do recommend trying to find some of that common ground, the common ground being that we are there for the success and well-being of every student. And so that would be my hope of that's where we're going to land, and making sure that when we're sharing, it's fact-based, and we're also self-assessing. Where am I wrong? Is there something that I need to do that maybe my perspective is off? And so those conversations need to be had. And I know that I need to have a conversation with Ms. Guzman because she clearly was misguided in some areas, and I need to make sure that she knows the law and also like how to communicate with the families. And plan B. So if my other plan didn't work, I would really focus on that building, making sure that that classroom becomes accessible. So funding a building project to make classrooms accessible will most likely be more cost effective than paying legal fees and possibly restitution to the family. So if we follow down that legal pathway, that leads to a lot of funds being drawn out of the district. And I think that that money is much better spent to just update the school. So that would be my plan B. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you so much.